forest was alive with silence. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that carries weight. The kind that presses against your ears until you wonder if you are hearing the sound of your own blood moving inside you. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of moss and wet earth, the kind of air that clung to your throat and tasted faintly of iron. The fog drifted low, crawling across the path like something alive. It wound itself around the roots of the trees, thickening between the trunks until the world beyond seemed to vanish. The lantern stood there, waiting. Its post was crooked, leaning as though it had been planted centuries ago and forgotten, yet the flame inside the glass glowed strong and steady. It was not the warm yellow of a hearth, nor the golden flicker of a street lamp. Instead, it was pale, almost silver, its light spilling across the fog in ribbons. It seemed to bend the world, pulling you toward it. You paused, listening. No cricket sang here. No wind stirred the leaves. It felt as if every branch and stone and shadow was holding its breath. A whisper floated past your ear. You turned sharply, but there was nothing. The fog rippled, closing in again. "Do not stop," a voice breathed. It was so close, so near, that for a moment you thought someone had leaned over your shoulder. You froze, waiting for a hand to touch your arm, but the space beside you was empty. The words clung to the air, faint as the mist. "Who is there?" you asked, your own voice sounding too loud, breaking the stillness like glass shattering. No answer came, only the faint echo of your question swallowed by the trees. The lantern's flame shifted, as if it had flickered in response, though no breeze stirred the forest. Its glow stretched across the path, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out and curl toward you. You stepped closer, your shoes sinking into the damp earth. The smell of the forest thickened, layers of wet bark, rotting leaves, and something else beneath it, something sharp and metallic. You thought of rusted nails, of an old well where water had not been drawn in years. The lantern swayed slightly. Again, the voice came. This time softer, almost tender. "You have come far. Do not turn back now." The sound had a texture to it, smooth, yet edged, like silk sliding over stone. You looked around again, half expecting to see a figure emerging from the fog. But the path behind you was already gone, swallowed into whiteness. Only forward remained. "I cannot see you," you said, your voice quieter now. "Where are you?" The whisper answered, closer than before. "I am here. I have always been here." The lantern's glass glowed brighter, and in the reflection you thought you saw something. Not your own face, but another. For the briefest moment, two eyes stared back at you, dark and patient. Then the light shifted, and the reflection was gone. You stepped beneath the lantern's glow. The fog parted slightly, just enough to reveal the path stretching onward. The ground was uneven, lined with stones half buried in moss, leading deeper into the mist. Your chest felt tight, not with fear exactly, but with a strange anticipation, as though the air itself was guiding you. "Keep walking," the voice said again, and so you did. The path narrowed, hemmed in by trees so tall their branches knotted together far above, forming a ceiling of twisted limbs. The bark was dark with damp, rough with patches of lichen that glowed faintly in the pale light. Every few steps you thought you heard another voice, not words, but fragments, breaths, sighs that slipped between the trunks and disappeared before you could understand them. You came to a clearing at last. The fog thinned, curling at the edges of a stone square. At its center stood a well. Its stones were old, uneven, slick with moss. The wooden roof above it sagged, half rotten, and the rope that hung from its beam was frayed to threads. The whisper was stronger here, rising from the dark mouth of the well itself. You stepped closer. The air grew colder with every pace. until it burned against your skin. You leaned over the rim, peering into the blackness. It was bottomless, a tunnel of silence that seemed to stretch forever. "Listen," the voice said. And you did. From the depths came a sound, faint at first, but growing, curling upward like smoke. It was your name, spoken slowly, spoken with care. Your heart jolted against your ribs. "Who are you?" you whispered. "Why do you know me?" The reply came, calm, steady, patient. "I have known you since before you were born. I will know you after you're gone. You belong to me." The fog thickened around the well, curling higher, pressing against your shoulders, your neck, your face. It was not suffocating, not yet, but heavy enough that your thoughts felt slower, heavier, as though they were being carried down into the dark. You tried to step back, but the stone rim pressed cold against your hands. "Do not leave," the voice said. "Not now. You have only just arrived." You swallowed, your mouth dry. "This place, what is this place?" The answer rose, hushed and certain. "The town. Do you not see it?" You blinked, and the fog shifted. Houses began to take shape at the edges of the clearing. Crooked roofs, leaning chimneys, windows dark and staring. The town revealed itself slowly. A dozen shapes at first, then more, until the square was ringed with silent buildings. Their doors stood slightly open as though waiting. The well breathed again, and the voice whispered, "They have been waiting for you." The fog moved like breath over the square, rising and falling in slow currents that curled around the stone well. The houses stood in a ring, their roofs pitched like folded hands, their windows dark and watchful. The lantern at the edge of the square gave off its pale glow, and every surface seemed to gather that light and hold it, the way a calm pond holds the moon. You stood very still. The whisper from the well had settled into a hush, not gone, only resting. You could feel it like a thread in the air, a thin line that connected the darkness below to the space behind your heart. The square was silent, except for the soft drip of water somewhere out of sight, a patient rhythm that made time feel thick and slow. You spoke into the stillness. "I came because I heard the lantern speak. I do not know what you want from me." The answer rose from the stones under your hands, as if the town itself had inhaled and was ready to breathe out words. "We want only what you already carry. Bring it into the light, and you may rest." You looked around the ring of open doors. Each one was slightly ajar, as though the town had stepped out for a moment and would return any second, as though every room still remembered the shape of a person who had lived there. The fog pooled in the entryways like water, and then shifted back as if it had been startled. "Where do I begin?" you asked. "Begin anywhere," said the voice. "The path is made with each step." You chose the house nearest the well. Its door was wood-gone soft and gray with age, worn smooth at the height of a hand. You touched the handle. It was colder than the air, and it seemed to notice you, the way a river notices the weight of a foot placed in the current. The door swung inward without a sound. The smell of the room was old paper, cold ash, and dried herbs. Inside, the fog thinned. The lantern light from outside reached over the floorboards and came to rest at the base of a narrow staircase. A mantle of stone held a row of jars, each labeled in a script so delicate it looked like it might lift and float away if you breathed too hard. You moved closer and read the names aloud. Willow bark, lavender, rustleaf, old mint. The last jar was empty. A small card lay behind its glass like a sleeping moth. Its label was a single word that felt familiar in the same way a melody feels familiar when you cannot place where you heard it. Before. You touched the jar with 2 fingers. A faint coolness passed through your skin into your bones. The voice stirred again, quiet and near. "Do you remember the field? The way the sky loosened and opened and you thought, This is a place I might live forever. You answered without thinking. I was young. The grass was tall. There was a fence of old wood and a gate that never closed. There was a dog that ran in great circles until the light faded. Yes, said the voice. There was a bell on the wind and no one could tell where it came from. You drew your hand away from the jar. The memory hovered and then settled like dust on a windowsill. You looked at the stair and the narrow hall that turned out of sight. The house held itself in a hush that felt kind, like the inside of a church when candles are still burning. Who lived here? You asked. What did they leave behind? The floor answered with a soft groan as you moved down the hall. Faded pictures hung crooked where the walls had shifted over the years. Faces had been sketched in charcoal and then smudged by time until the eyes were only shadows under gentle brows. A clock stood at the end of the hall, tall and patient, the kind that counts every second with a wooden heart. Its pendulum moved, slow and steady, although you could not see any weight or spring that might have kept it alive. What are you keeping time for? You asked the clock, and your voice sounded warmer here than it had outside. The clock answered at once. Its voice was wood and low brass, sure and unhurried. For arrivals, for returns, for sleep.
You leaned close to the glass of the clock face and saw your reflection fade into the shape of someone else. For a moment, it was a woman with a braid coiled at the back of her head, eyes calm, mouth full of quiet stories no one had told yet. Then the glass cleared and showed only you. Is she here, you asked. The clock answered. She reads in the next room. She always returns to the same line. You followed the sound of pages. The door to the room stood open just enough to let your fingers slip through the space and push it wider. The room beyond was full of books stacked in columns that leaned against one another for support. A chair waited near a small window where the fog pressed its pale face to the glass. A book lay open on the chair with a ribbon tucked between its pages. The air was warm with the scent of old bindings and dried flowers that someone had left inside as thin bookmarks. You drew in the smell and felt it spread through your chest, soft and slow. You lifted the book. The ribbon fell into your lap, a faded strip of blue with a thread of silver woven through it. The page was printed with lines you had never seen, and yet your mouth formed the words as if it had been waiting to speak them for years. In every quiet town there is a well. In every well there is a stair without steps. In every stair there is the memory of someone who went down and did not return. Only those who listen can hear what the water remembers. You closed the book and sat very still, as if you did not wish to disturb something that had just gone to sleep. The voice breathed near your ear. She read that line each night for a year. Then she placed the book on the chair for the next person. The ribbon is yours if you will take it. You lifted the ribbon. It was softer than you expected, warm as if it had been against a wrist only a moment ago. You tied it around your own wrist without knowing why, and when you finished the knot, the ends lay neatly against your skin as if they had always belonged there. You spoke to the empty air. If I carry what others have left, what will I have left to carry for myself? Rest, said the voice. You will carry rest. You stood, and the floor answered with a courteous sigh. The fog at the window pulled back. The room brightened just enough that you could see a second door at the far end of the shelves. It opened onto a kitchen that belonged to someone who knew how to feed people who arrived without warning. Copper pots hung from hooks in a simple row. A kettle rested at the back of the stove, the kind that remembers the sound of hands and the shape of heat. You touched the kettle and felt a memory rise from it like steam. A table near the door held a thin plate of white porcelain. On the rim, a hairline fracture ran from the edge toward the center and then stopped, as if it had changed its mind. You turned the plate over. A single word was pressed into the clay before it had hardened. It was the same word that had been in the empty jar. Before. You set the plate down as gently as you could. It made the faintest sound, a ring that held onto the air. Footsteps moved across the ceiling. They were too slow to be a warning, too measured to be a threat. You lifted your head to listen. The steps paused. A voice called down, gentle and unsure. Is someone there? You answered without raising your voice. Yes. I came from the square. There is a well. There is a lantern. I followed the path. The steps resumed and the voice came closer until it was at the top of the stairs. I would like to come down if that is all right. It is all right, you said. The figure that appeared at the top of the stairs was not an intruder and not a ghost. It was a man dressed in the color of the fall. His hair was shot with gray. His face was calm, and his eyes were the kind that learn a person before they speak to them. He took each step as if he had no wish to startle the wood. I thought I heard the clock speaking, he said, and his mouth lifted at the corner as if he knew how that sounded. It did speak, you said. It told me it keeps time for arrivals and returns and sleep. He smiled at that. He reached the bottom of the stairs and folded his hands in front of him as if he were about to say a prayer or ask for one. Then it is keeping time for you, he said. Would you like tea? You looked at the kettle. I would. He moved with care. He did not hurry. He set water to warm and took 2 cups from a shelf where the glaze had thinned from use. He watched the surface of the water the way people watch the sky before a summer storm, with quiet attention. When the kettle sang, it was not a sharp cry but a low note that seemed to come from the center of the room. He poured. Steam rose, and the room smelled of mint, and something you could not name that reminded you of rain and stone. He placed a cup before you and held his own between both hands without drinking. You came when the lantern moved, he said. Not everyone sees it. Fewer follow it. Who are you, you asked. He thought about his answer for a long breath. I keep the keys that were never used and the books that were never returned. I keep a chair by the window for anyone who would like to sit and watch the fog arrive. I keep the stories that were set down and walked away from. I am called the reader because people like one name, and this one is as good as any. You took a sip. The tea warmed your mouth and spread out across your chest like a small fire that knew exactly how much heat to give. What is this town, you asked? Why does it feel like a place I have always been and never seen? He listened the way the clock listened, with patience and a steady face. It is a resting place between places. It exists when it needs to exist and becomes a memory when it does not. Those who arrive usually do not know why. They are called by something simple. A scent that returns when it has been gone for years. A sound that is part of a song without an end. A light in a fog. And the well, you said. The well remembers, he said. It keeps the echoes of what was left unsaid. Sometimes it repeats them so that the person who needs to hear them may finally do so. You set your cup down and listened to the faint drip somewhere near the back door. The sound now seemed to count time with the clock. In the space between each drip, a soft hush collected and then poured away. I heard my name spoken, you said. I know, he answered, and his voice did not carry surprise. Most who arrive hear their name. Most do not speak of it. You are welcome to speak of it. You watched the steam from your tea as it rose in a thin white thread and then faded. It was said with care, you said, as if someone had been practicing for a long time and did not wish to startle me. It felt like a hand placed lightly on my shoulder in a dark room to say, I am here. The reader nodded once. Then you will sleep if you wish. There is a bed upstairs and it remembers how to hold a person. There are blankets. There is a window that looks out on the square and the well. The clock will keep time and the fog will not enter unless you ask it to keep you company. You looked at the stairs, then at the open page on the chair. Will the town be here when I wake, you ask. The town is here while it is needed, he said. It is here now. When you sleep, it will keep watch. When you wake, it will be ready to show you something new if you ask to see it. How long have you been here, you ask. He answered with a small smile that carried both warmth and a little sadness. I came on a winter night when the air tasted like iron and smoke. I followed a bell that seemed to ring from inside my own chest. I promised to keep a chair by the window. I promised to listen when the clock spoke. I have done that ever since. It is easy to keep your promises in a place that knows how to wait. He drained his cup and set it down, and the cup made that same thin ring that the plate had made, and the sound tied itself to the air as if two notes had found each other. You rose. The ribbon on your wrist lay against your skin like a small river. The reader watched your eyes and then glanced toward the stair. When the fog shifts later, go to the house with the colored glass in the front room, he said. Stand where the light falls. Ask your question there. The answer may be slower than you like, but it will be clear. What should I ask, you said. Ask what you have been carrying that you do not need to carry. Then ask what you have not carried that would have been light in your hands. You thanked him. He nodded as if thanks were a simple stone placed carefully on a windowsill. You climbed the stairs. Each step carried the weight of a person who had climbed it before and had set their weight down with care. The bed in the small room had a quilt stitched with blue thread. The stitches were neat and small and seemed to have been made at night when someone had been thinking of someone else. You sat. The mattress lifted you slightly and then held you, a gentle hand under your shoulders and another under your knees. From the window you could see the square with the well at its center. The lantern gave off its pale glow. In the glow, the fog did not look like smoke anymore. It looked like breath. You spoke softly, as if the town could hear you through glass. I will rest for a while. The room answered with a very quiet sound that could have been a mouse in the wall and could have been the wood remembering a story it had been told a long time ago. You closed your eyes and let the weight of your body sink into the bed. Your thoughts tried to keep moving and then decided they did not need to. They settled like leaves at the bottom of a clear pool.